Chapter 5, Small Purchase Procedures. Contents. We're going to talk about micro purchases, small purchases, petty cash. How many of you are still using petty cash? Most of my clients have quit. We use credit cards. Why? So much easier to control everything. So much easier. Why? Because statements don't lie. Use of indefinite delivery contracts, even for quotes, bid or quote splitting, purchase orders, and required forms and mandatory clauses. Introduction. Now, these small and micro purchase procedures are designed to give you the flexibility you need to buy what you need to get work done, especially micro threshold. The current threshold for small purchases is $250, but remember, your states establish a lower threshold. I know for a fact that Texas is $50,000. I have been told by the HUD office New Mexico is $60,000, so I'm going to believe it. You've looked it up. That is really, for the vast majority of you, more than enough room to do quotes underneath it. But we're going to talk about that because quotes are not always the best value of what you want to do. Micro purchases threshold is at $10,000. We've done some research. It is now $10,000 in New Mexico. Don't think that you're going to do anybody a favor if you establish $5,000. You're allowed to. I'm going to tell you something after tons of experience. You're only shooting yourself in the foot. Establish $10,000 as your micro threshold, but that does not mean that you won't do a quote when it would be better to do so. And let me give you an example. You may be able to go buy a generator for $9,000, a good steel sleeve Honda generator, and that's under the $10,000. However, if you were to contact 3 people and get a quote, you might save a bit of money. And by might, I'm being facetious. You will save, because what's quoted on their website or what you're quoted to you when you first ask for it is not their best price. You're the supplier. I'm calling you up to get a quote from you for this generator. And just be aware, I'm calling others too. And we're going to award to the lowest cost. That price just went from $9,000 down to whatever. Who else am I calling? Oh, we don't disclose that information. Just say, I'm going to get 3, and it's probably who you think it is, and then maybe even more. And that cost will probably go from $9,000 down to $8,400, thereby saving $600. Remember, the price must be reasonable. Now let's talk about micro purchases. You do not have to do quotes for micro purchases. In the aggregate, you do not have to do quotes. However, just because you see a price somewhere, you have to decide whether it's reasonable. Now, contracting officers, EDs, if you buy it for that price, HUD says, then you're affirming it's reasonable. Yeah, that's your affirmation that it's reasonable. And HUD says, if you're not sure, then you need to check. You need to check around and see. For a micro purchase under $10,000, an ICE is not required. However, if I do a quote under $10,000, I put an ICE in the file. You know why? Because HUD is going to expect to see ICEs for competitive solicitations. That's a hint for everybody here. If it's competitive, do an ICE, even if it's under $10,000. It's usually for simple stuff like labor job, work job, or 10 refrigerators. That's simple to do those ICEs, very simple. Your signature verifies that it's appropriate, though, if you don't do an ICE. The small purchases, now remember, small, anything above a small, we do an advertised solicitation. We put an ad in the paper. Federal lever, $250, Texas is, and New Mexico is, $50 for Texas, $60 for New Mexico. You must solicit and receive at least 3 quotes. Now, HUD says in the regulation you must solicit 3. They don't mean you ask for 3. They mean you ask and receive 3. Can you justify less than 3? Potentially, yes. But it has to be justifiable. For instance, I had one of my staff walk in, and we used to have, for little simple telephone quotes, we had this form that had lines on it and where you filled in everybody's and the contact information and their price. And he called 3 people for this. I'm going to say it was a generator. And only one of them turned in a bid, and the other 2 said no quote. Now, is a no bid a bid? It is not. No bid is not a bid. No bid. So therefore, it is not a bid. It is not justifiable. Plus, this was a setup from him because the quote he called a generator shop, and then he called a dry cleaners and a donut shop. I don't remember if those were the things, but it was just as ridiculous as what I just said. And I said, what are you doing? He goes, oh, don't worry about it, Mike. Boss, I got to make sure they get this right here, this generator. That has a technical term. It's called fraud, collusion. I don't know what else is there. I said, no. Call 2 other generator shops. And he says, well, then they might win. They might. Do you know we're all laughing? But I got to tell you something. I see this kind of thing done all the time. Maybe not as silly as I just said it, but it's done. Don't do it. Also, when he asks for a certain type of generator and a model number, what are the other 2 words we always have to add to it? Or equal is the terms. But the term in the handbook is or equal. So I'm telling you, anytime you have a brand name on anything, you have to use the term or equal and accept anything else that's within a reasonable range of tolerance. Documentation required, where you're going to have an ICE form. For small purchases, you're going to have documentation showing that multiple people were called. Oh, by the way, Mike, I called 3 and I only got 1. You're telling me I have to call more? I go, yeah. If you called 3 and got 1, that means that if you call 9, you'll get 3. So call 9 more or 6 more. They called me back and says, Mike, I called 6 more and I only got 1 more. Great. Now call 4 more because you'll get your 3rd one. I don't have time. Then why are you doing public procurement purchasing? If you don't have time to do this, all the time we've spent on the phone, stay with me. I want you to see this. When you're making these decisions, all the time we've spent on the phone, you could have already called those other people. Get 3. 3 is the thing. We'll talk about later, how can we justify less than 3? Get 3. So all this documentation, including all outreach, must be in the file. All your notes. If only 1 quote is received, you must include a statement indicating that the price was reasonable based on your thoughts, and why is there an absence of competition? And again, I need to remind you, your lack of time to do it is not an excuse, nor is because we waited too long. The obligation deadline was coming. Those are not excuses. Then you have to have an explanation supporting award by other factors unrelated to price, which means not responsive or not responsible. But remember, when we receive 3 quotes, who do we award to? The lowest cost. As long as they are responsive and responsible. You see, they might not quote you what you wanted to buy. If they're not giving you an item that's equal to what you're buying, you don't have to award to them. Usually at that point I say, well, give me something equal to. Well, no, that's going to cost you more. Well, I'm not going to pay more, so you're out. And then responsible, somebody you actually want to do business with. By the way, do you notice that we keep reminding documentation must be available? This is going up on multiple screens throughout this presentation. You know why? Because folks tend to throw stuff away. If it ain't written, don't exist. Petty cash. You know, petty cash, very small one-time purchases. Again, I go with credit cards. You can get a credit card just for the agency and store it in a central place and have it turned back in. You know, petty cash and credit cards both, staff sometimes mess up and do wrong things. You just know it quicker when you use a credit card. If you do have a petty cash fund, you got to establish a procedure with a max amount in the fund. I don't know, $200, $150. Maximum purchase amount, yeah. We got rid of the petty cash because of fraud, honestly. She didn't give me 20, she only gave me a 10. No, and then we found out they bought snacks. Who administers the fund? Whatever documentation is required to administer the funds, you're going to have the receipt, and then you're going to have to coding on the receipt where that's coded out to. Which program, which site, how often funds are replenished. So much hassle. Credit card, it really works. HUD encourages the use of indefinite delivery contracts. Absolutely, and I agree fully. These are sometimes called, for small purchases, blanket purchase agreements or blanket purchase orders. It's when we issue a purchase order for a period of time with a maximum not to exceed amount. And then that allows people to go buy against that. I had about 600 of these things out every year because every office had one for their office supplies. Hey, I didn't have staff who could for office supplies for everybody every week. People had budgets. $2,000. I do a blanket purchase order for $2,000 for Office Max if that was our contract holder, and I did that on a piggyback. Somebody else did a bid, and then I awarded per the bid. And then each office would buy what they needed and use that same PO until they drew the money all down. It's called a blanket purchase agreement. Frequent small purchases, very small or micro purchases, but you need them on a recurring basis. Really, the exact items and the quantities are unknown, but the unit cost is known because I have a contract. So if I give you a blanket PO for $2,000, when you call up and utilize it, they've already coded you. Home Depot is the same way. And all of my sites had blanket purchase agreements for Home Depot and HD Supply. The bid had already been done. They could buy till their daddy takes their blanket purchase order away. BP allows you to get that preset price, but not to go through all the minutiae of receiving stuff in. In the old days, we had a warehouse, which HUD made us disband it. I was so angry. When it was all done, I went, oh, this is the greatest thing ever. No warehouse, no managing stock that gets old. Yeah, it was terrible. So we went to blanket purchase agreement where people could order themselves from their desk and get delivered to the desk. We controlled it. I had spreadsheets and things that watched over it every month, but it was a lot better. Remember, anything over the micro threshold, competition is required. Let me give you an example. Let's say we do a quote for something, and the quotes come in at $20,000, $20,001, and $20,002. We've done a quote for this. That means we've got competition, we got 3. And let's say here that this is the worst contractor we've ever had. This person we know nothing about, and this is our best. So, it's only $3 difference. Let's just jump over these two. In fact, I'll pay $3 into the fund to make up the difference, and then we'll just go to this person who's really good. Do we all agree you can do that? No, you can't do that. Let's say we've got this contractor who's really done bad work. Can we eliminate them? Yes, as long as we have in the file notices to cure and detailing out the history of all of their inappropriate, poor work. Because when my people would go to me or my director and say, don't award to that contractor, I'd say, let me see your notices to cure. I don't have time to write those notices. Then I don't have time to say no to that contractor. Have the paperwork in the file. But let's say that we do have the paperwork, then we can eliminate them. But I got a question for you. If you were never going to give them an award, why did you fraudulently solicit a price from them? And it certainly was not unfair to them to give them the idea that you might award to them when you never had any intention to award to them. You know what I do? There have been on my career a handful of contractors that were so bad that when we were done with the last job, we gave them a letter and said, you can't bid with us anymore. Of course, that has to be backed up by my attorney, my executive director, the board, and our local HUD office if they're politically connected, because they're certainly going to get a call. So we informed our HUD office there in Vegas that we have barred this bidder from bidding. All HUD ever did was says, well, that's your decision. Send us the paperwork. And we sent them all the justification and the notices, and they never said anything. Why? Well, I think because we're the one who has to pay the price, not HUD. But we informed them. So we kicked them out, and we wouldn't take bids from certain people. Now, I think we're all in agreement. We know nothing about this contractor. We'll just eliminate them as being non-responsive and jump to the last one. So we're all in agreement. We can just jump over that person we know nothing about and make the award, correct? No, if we're going to eliminate them, of course we do. We have to check them out. But I don't have time to do that. So let's just jump over them, right? No. By the way, for a $20,000 bid, you can do 10 minutes worth of calls. Call people and say, would you hire them again? If they say yes, well, then your risk is low. And you know what could happen from that? Maybe now we're going to have 2 preferred contractors, 2 people we really like. Let me give you another issue. Let's say that we have a purchase. What's our micro threshold? $10,000. Let's say we have a purchase of $9,000, and now we need something from the same vendor or another vendor, but the same item, and we go and buy the other vendor for $9,000. Is that allowed? All without a bid. Is that allowed? The answer is no. It's in 5.3c of the handbook. This is called bid splitting or unbundling. The micro threshold is in the aggregate. It means all purchases from a certain vendor or purchases of the same items from different vendors, if they're over $10,000 in value during a year, you have to do competition or a piggyback or some other thing. Does everybody got me? This was so difficult when it was $3,000 and $2,000. Now it's $10,000. It's much easier on us. If you buy electrical supplies from one vendor for $9,000 and another vendor from $9,000 and you don't have bids, you don't have competition, you don't have a piggyback justified, you've just violated the law, because these 2 together add up to 18, and everything over $10,000 must be the result of competition or justified otherwise. In the aggregate, if you do a competitive process, you're going to select the vendor through a variety of issues, but it's usually price, the quality of the goods, and whether they were responsive or responsible. You can have more than one vendor for products. In fact, it's good to have various sources of supply. However, if in the aggregate they exceed $10,000, you've got a problem if you didn't do a bid. Every blanket purchase agreement must list generally what people can buy, who can buy, which employee is, and a not to exceed amount. Listen to me carefully. Every contract, purchase order, or blanket purchase order must have a not to exceed amount. Now remember, you can change those amounts very easily just by doing a modification to the purchase order. It's not like construction where you have to justify all this stuff. In construction, change orders require a lot of justification. But if I have a blanket purchase order with a Home Depot and I run out of money, before I run out of money, I can change it from $6,000 to $10,000 just by simply changing the purchase order and informing the vendor that we have done so. We just talked about this here. It's in the aggregate and it's not allowed. Let's say, for instance, just like this, that you have to purchase 40 new refrigerators, estimated cost $32,000 or $800 a refrigerator. You need to solicit quotes for them because it's most certainly going to be above the $10,000. Instead, though, you ordered 10 refrigerators at $800 a piece, and that's $8,000, right? And you don't do a quote. And then you come back later and you do 10 more and you don't do a quote. That's that problem right there that I showed. Are you with me? So some folks say, but Mike, how do we know ahead of time? Don't ever say that around somebody from HUD because they know that you're not doing advanced planning. And how do you know? You look in your budget. How much do I have for appliances in there? If it's up in the 30, 20, 30, 40,000, what are we going to have to do? A quote or a bid. Purchase orders are a simplified contract type. Purchase orders do not have to be typed up before you go to the vendor if they are very low risk. Out of my 10,000 purchase orders a year, 7,000 of them were just PO numbers for purchases. Why? Because they were for small things like 300 here and 400 there. And I don't need to type that all up. It costs me more to type those up beforehand than I'm spending on the money. And why are they low risk? Because typically, hold on. If you ever do a PO for work, unless it's an emergency, I would type it up for work because work makes it high risk. But materials is low risk, and I'll tell you why. You go out, you use the PO number, you buy the thermostat, you bring it back and you go, oh man, it's the wrong one. As long as you haven't damaged the packaging or anything, you package it up, you take it back, and you exchange for the right one. Isn't that a typical thing, maintenance folks here? Sure. We get stuff, and we make sure we don't destroy stuff. Now, if it was a compressor for a HVAC unit, you better make sure it's right before you install it, because once you've soldered, you ain't going to get your money back. But we don't need a full typed up PO. You can use a PO number for that. When you do type up POs, elements of work, scope of the items of the services, what the price is, what the delivery is, because sometimes they deliver to us and we have to allow for shipping. How they're going to be paid, that's all on my terms and conditions for POs. Inspection and acceptance. What is the acceptance? When you sign the receipt, that's your acceptance. And you attach that to the purchase order. There are mandatory forms that HUD requires. Table 5.1 is required for all small purchases unless they're construction. In Table 5.1, they address different things. It's a 1.5 page form. EPA requirements, ownership and data, energy efficiency. They have a bunch of words on there, and it's required to be issued with the quotes or the purchases, small purchasing, except construction. Now, let me tell you about your problems with doing a quote for work. Let's say that you're in maintenance and your boss says, get this generator, and you know the model number, the brand name, and you call up 3 people and say, give me a quote over the phone. Now, Table 5.1 is not a problem. You don't need it for that because you can include it with the purchase order when you send it to buy it. However, make sure that you tell them are equal, and that's not a problem to write all of those prices down. Okay, you ever done that? Made 3 prices on a piece of paper and the 3 people you talked to? Yeah, a lot of people have done that. That's not really a big problem with quotes for materials or equipment. However, let's say that a wind comes through and knocks down 6 trees, and we're estimating that to clear up those trees and branches is going to be about $9,000 because we did it last year and that's what it cost us then. Are you with me? Now, to have 3 people come out and give you a price, the problem is to do it all verbal is very problematic, because when it's talking about labor, we're going to have a whole bunch of things that apply to labor. Wage rates, how to clean it up, safety, disposal, safety during the job. There's just a whole bunch of stuff. So doing that over the phone and making sure everybody gets the same language is going to be problematic. So you're going to have to write up a scope of work, which could be just on a page or 2. How they clean it up, the time period we have to have it done within. Now, how do we cover wage rates for tree trimming? What kind of wage rates do we give them? Davis-Bacon is construction only, and tree trimming is not construction. Maintenance wage rate decision, Form HUD 52158. How do you give that out over the phone? The next issue we have to issue is Table 5.1. Okay. The next issue we have to issue is, because it's work, Form HUD 5370C, Section 2, General Contract Conditions with Maintenance Work, which is 3 pages long. Wait a minute, we're up to about 10 pages. So let me ask you something. How can you call up anybody over the phone, get 3 prices when work is being provided, and still be in compliance with HUD requirements? You can't. You can't do it. So if you're buying equipment or materials, it's within the realm of possibility you can call for 3 quotes on the phone. With the rest of that, it's just not real. It's not practical or reasonable that will occur. Remember, your micro threshold is now how much? $10,000, except for construction, and it's $2,000. Your micro threshold for construction is $2,000, so you have to have competition on anything over $2,000 for a construction job. I'm surprised nobody's asked me what's the difference between construction and maintenance. First of all, HUD has described construction as new construction and major rehabilitation. That brings it down a little bit. Now let me give you the next thing. This is my fail-safe way to describe the difference between construction and maintenance. Are you ready? I can't describe it, but I know it when I see it. And so do you. Hold on a minute. Let's say that we call in a plumbers, and you've only got 2 in town, and you call a plumber to come in and fix a broken toilet because it's just whatever, somebody's off. Hold on. But the toilet is the example. And they're going to have to even replace that toilet. Is that construction or maintenance? Everybody said maintenance, and I agree with you. However, I'm going to go to the next thing. 8-inch main breaks in the middle of the street. They've got to bring in the backhoe and everything, and they've got to get it done. Construction or maintenance? It's construction because it's major rehab. You have a unit turnaround, somebody goes in, it's got to patch up the flooring, and in one case, replace all the flooring in one room, patch a few holes in the walls, paint it, replace a few light fixtures, construction or maintenance. I believe that's maintenance. However, you've got 5-unit turnarounds that are really bad, and they need major work. I got a housing authority now where I'm doing over 100 units. And when I told him construction, he goes, but when you told me to do this other, you said it was maintenance. I go, but it's different when you've got a whole bunch of it together. Now it falls into those other trades. But remember, there is no clear definition except that we've had audits through audits and our definition that we have in the file, and it's been accepted. Remember, even if it's not capital funds, you're spending it on a construction project, you're still Davis-Bacon. There are some people who have spent all of their capital funds, but they have to do a job, and they said, Mike, I have no more capital money, so I'm going to have to pay for this job out of operating. And I said, it's still Davis-Bacon. That has nothing to do with it because it's a construction project. And then the other thing I tell them is everybody's getting paid more than that anyway, so stop worrying about it saving money by trying to find ways to get around the Davis-Bacon wage rates. Generally speaking, in almost all areas, those wage rates are lower than what people are getting in today's economy. Just to let you know, that's not a law or a rule. Contract clauses continued. For construction, remember, 5370 EZ is for construction. 5370 is for construction bids. So the 5370 EZ is for construction quotes, and the more inclusive form, the 5370, is for bids. For maintenance, you're also going to need Section 2 of 5370C. Remember I talked about that earlier? Yes.